The worst thing is when relatives and friends betray you. In fact, they are the only people you can rely on and trust. One person betraying is one thing, but them conspiring against you is a completely different matter. That is exactly what happened to me. It took me a long time to get over it. Family. You have to cherish them because you can't get rid of them. I'm not sure about the source of this saying, but to me, it contains undeniable truth. If I had a choice, I might say goodbye to most of my relatives without hesitation. But now let me go back. I was the second son in the family, and also the youngest of 3 children. Although some people think that the youngest child in the family usually gets preferential treatment, my parents seem to have missed that memo. As the baby of the family, I got the least popular food, the least wanted household chores, and was the only one who wore hand-me-down clothes, despite the fact that our family's financial situation could afford better. You might think I'm exaggerating, but a typical example is that it wasn't until my sister, the eldest child in the family, went to college when I was 14, that I had tasted a piece of white meat chicken dinner. Before the era of the TV remote control, I was always assigned to change TV channels in the family room, no matter where I was in the house. Whether I was nearby or not, I would get a call and be expected to appear before the desired program started. Switching channels. This was not exactly Cinderella and her stepsister's story, but to me, it was not far off. Then Susan Marsden entered my life. My brother Wayne. I would watch as the moving truck arrived at the old Johnson's house, 3 houses away. A dark blue Chevrolet station wagon parked in front. A man, a woman, a boy, and a blonde blue-eyed girl appeared. My heart raced. I started to sweat, my stomach churned. This feeling became very familiar over the next few decades. Jeffy and the blonde girl sitting in the tree. Kissing. First comes love. Then comes marriage. Then comes Jeffy pushing a baby carriage. Wayne teased in a childish singing manner. When I was 8 years old, I didn't fully understand the meaning of that little tombstone. But I was old enough to understand that Wayne thought I had a crush on the new girl. This was not something any boy my age would want to admit. Girls were considered off-limits, even if they looked like blonde-haired, blue-eyed angels. Despite the confusion in my mind, I couldn't admit it to my annoying 10-year-old brother. "Shut up, idiot," I said loudly. "Oh, you think you're tough, huh?" he retorted. At that moment, Wayne, who had a clear height and weight advantage over me, made it clear that I had no chance in a fight. Although I had tried in the past, I had failed. But at that moment, I didn't want to appear weak in front of the most beautiful girl I had ever seen. 12-year-old Eddie and 8-year-old Susan Marsden were the only 2 children on our street. So it was natural that my siblings and I spent a lot of time with them. Due to our age, Susan and I often played together. She was a bit of a tomboy, able to throw a baseball and a football almost as well as me. We quickly formed a strong bond. Soon we became best friends. Although she made connections with other girls in our small rural town, we remained each other's main trust until the end of our 8th grade. Although we had never kissed, we occasionally held hands, both at school and in public. Despite my male friends' teasing, I secretly enjoyed it, because I regarded her as the most beautiful girl in town. She could still quicken my heartbeat. Just before the end of the school year, our freshman football team's quarterback, Josh Archer, invited Susan to the high school's end-of-year freshman mixer. She gladly accepted. I felt completely shattered, beyond anything I had experienced in my young life. But I thought we were together. When she mentioned her date, I sobbed, trying to hold back tears in front of her. "Well, you never really asked me to be your girlfriend," And he's a high school freshman football team quarterback," she exclaimed cheerfully. "Yeah, whatever," I mumbled, turning away, leaving her and a group of excited girls. I went into my house, feeling very bad. My brother approached, seemingly about to impart some wise, brotherly advice. After all, wasn't he the experienced sophomore? "The blonde girl really likes you, doesn't she?" he cheered, using a curse word, which caught the attention of our mother. Even Wayne being grounded for a week for swearing didn't alleviate the pain of losing a girlfriend. Mom tried to comfort me, insisting that it was just a date. It didn't mean Susan didn't like me anymore. As if I would believe that. I didn't go to Susan's place, and she didn't come to mine. A week before the freshman mixer, I resisted the temptation to linger outside, just to catch a glimpse of her. When Josh Archer's dad picked her up, the blonde girl looked beautiful, really. They made a great couple, my brother commented sarcastically. After returning home, Mr. Archer left a few minutes later. Susan and I kept our distance. For the rest of the school year and the summer, we would wave to each other. But neither of us made an effort to start a conversation. I won't deny it. I was miserable. But it seemed she had moved on. Meanwhile, I hadn't. I hardly interacted with other girls, spending most of my free time playing baseball during the day and basketball at night. I was quite good at sports. By keeping myself busy, I managed to avoid thinking about Susan too much. Well, most of it. My brother kept me informed of her activities, especially her dating life. He always made sure to update me every time she went out with someone new. My parents noticed Susan's absence from our family gatherings. Many times, my brother was happy to share stories, seeing her with different guys. However, my sister Diana often defended me, pointing out that my brother wasn't very successful with girls either. I might ask the blonde girl out. She had always been friendly to me. My brother excitedly suggested, "If she goes out with you, I'll make sure you'll regret it," I shouted, focusing on my brother. I didn't expect the slap from my father. It hit me hard in the face, almost knocking me out of my chair. "You're lucky you're too far away from me, or I'd get you," my dad warned my brother. "But let me make it clear. If I find out you're messing around with Susan, there will be consequences, and they won't be mild." "Understood," Wayne mumbled. My first week of my freshman year was a revelation. Before, most girls didn't notice me except for Susan. Suddenly I became the focus. Because every pretty freshman girl seemed eager to get to know me. Because I had grown 4 inches over the summer and gained 25 pounds. I was now 6 feet tall, 175 pounds, with long, dark brown curly hair and big brown eyes. I think I looked pretty good. I also found that not being with Susan was to my advantage. At first, I was scared by the attention the freshman girls gave me. But I have to admit I liked it. I initially went out with a few different girls, then chose a petite, admirable, red-haired girl as my girlfriend. Erin Griffin. Always lively and cheerful. That's why she made the freshman cheerleading squad. Also, she had plump, tempting lips. I was happy to kiss regularly. Life was good. 2 days after the Christmas dance, Mom brought Susan into my room, telling me I had a visitor and to keep the door open. Susan and I both blushed. "Jeff, I made a mistake when I went out with another guy last year. Although we were together, I was too scared to admit it." She admitted. "Since then, I've dated a few guys. And now I realize you're the best. I want us to start over." I sat on my bed, absorbed in a book when Susan entered the room. I didn't move, she spoke. It took me a while to respond. Sitting there in silence. Then nodding and understanding. If we continue like this, no ifs, ands or buts, you're my girlfriend. That means you can't see or date another man. Obviously, no flirting, no kissing. No such thing. If you do anything suspicious, we're over. Completely over, I clarified. I understand, she whispered. But first, I need to end things with Erin. She's a very nice girl. I care about her a lot. I admit, yes, I know. I saw how close you two were at the Christmas dance. I felt like it should have been me by your side. Not some other girl, she replied. Erin took the news as could be expected. I knew I had done wrong by breaking up with her. But Susan and I quickly reconnected. Now with added kissing. And my occasional cautious touching, which usually got me a raised eyebrow from her. Then a quick smile. She was my partner, in every sense of the word. Despite other men trying to pursue her, some of whom I knew, she remained true to her word. We jointly decided to attend the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In our freshman year, we lived on different floors of the same dormitory. However, for the next 3 years, we shared an off-campus apartment. Although both sets of parents were aware of our living arrangements, not fully in agreement, but mostly accepting, Susan had to assure her parents that she would continue using birth control after graduation. In fact, we got married in our sophomore year. Our parents generously hosted a lovely wedding for us. The event went smoothly until near the end, when Wayne decided to touch my new wife inappropriately during a slow dance. I happened to be on the other side of the room. But within moments I intervened, quickly removing his hand from her and landing a punch to his mouth. Ouch! He exclaimed, bleeding from the gums. I warned you before, asshole. Never touch my wife. I yelled at him as onlookers rushed over to pull us apart. After regaining composure, the rest of the wedding went off without a hitch. I didn't dwell on the fact that my wife never intervened when my brother put his hand on her buttocks. Susan and I returned to our hometown after graduation. I found a job as an editor at a small magazine group, while Susan worked for a non-profit organization. Until we started a family. Once our child was born, she became a stay-at-home mom. My income allowed for this arrangement. Although I knew I wouldn't get rich, my annoying brother was no longer an issue. When he moved to California, a year later, with his 2-year wife, he was always good with sweet talk, which was useful in his television advertising sales job. According to my mother, he found considerable success living in a luxurious house in an upscale neighborhood. I was genuinely happy for him, though secretly relieved. Our encounters would be few. Time flies, as it tends to do. 2 years after we got married, Marianne was born. She instantly became the center of my world. 2 years later, we completed our family. At 38, Susan still had the power to quicken my pulse. We were both dedicated fitness enthusiasts. I admired her figure, which looked as impressive as when we first got married, despite having 2 children. In fact, in some ways, she looked even better. Her breasts were slightly larger. Her hips and buttocks added more curves. Overall, she had become a more mature version of herself. I felt grateful that she was mine. My mother's call was devastating. Despite never smoking, my brother was diagnosed with lung cancer. His doctor estimated he had about 2 years to live. Apparently, he had been experiencing symptoms for several months, but mostly ignored them until he could no longer manage on his own. By this point, Wayne had been married and divorced twice. His ex-wives unable to tolerate his infidelity But at least there were no children involved. The luxurious house he once owned. Lost in the divorce. He now lived alone in a less affluent neighborhood. In a modest 2-bedroom apartment. Despite a successful career. Apparently Wayne would need support in the future. Mom had some ideas. About how we could come together. To help him. She called a family meeting for the following Sunday. Expecting my wife Susan. My sister Diana, her husband Ronnie. And me to gather at my parents' house. A lot of decisions were made at the meeting. Wayne expressed that he wished to stay in his home. For as long as possible. Although this caused inconvenience for those who would help him. Considering. Other family members. Lived on the other half of the country. Ultimately. Agreed that the 3 women in the family. My mother, sister, and wife. Would take turns living with Wayne and helping him. Since my wife didn't work. And our children were old enough to help at home. Susan would live with Wayne for 4 weeks. Actually, once every round of my sister and mother's 2 weeks. My mother and sister both had jobs. Would live for 2 weeks each round. The rotation would consist of Diana living for 2 weeks. Susan for 4. Then my mother for 2. Followed by Susan's other 4. And then the cycle would repeat. I asked my wife in surprise. The origin of this complex schedule. I understand you have more flexibility because you don't work. But you also have 2 children to take care of at home. Marianne can drive now. She can help take Will to his sports, practices and other activities. She replied. When I'm not home, the 3 of you need to be more efficient. When I'm home, I have to be more organized. We have to do what we can for Wayne. That's what family does, she concluded. I couldn't argue with that. Even though I was taking the biggest hit in this deal. Despite my brother being difficult, he was family. My children and I could adapt. We had a video call with Wayne in our parents' living room. He was thrilled that the women volunteered to help. Which also touched everyone here. It felt like a scene from a sentimental Hallmark Channel movie. Before Susan's first shift in California. We had a family meeting. The children understood that Uncle Wayne needed help. So they promised to help me at home. Susan also prepared several meals in advance. Before going to Wayne. I appreciate everything you do for the family, honey. I said to Susan, just remember you're there to help Wayne. Not to be his personal servant. Don't let him manipulate you. And don't buy any of his nonsense. She nodded with tears in her eyes. Then walked through the airport gates. During Susan's first shift in California. The children and I spoke with her every other day. She said Wayne was in good spirits. Still able to accomplish most tasks. When she came home, the 3 of us went to the airport to pick her up. Her 2 weeks at home flew by, before we knew it. She was back in California. This time, she prepared meals for us again. The 4 of us spent a lot of quality time together. When she was at home, it felt like our family became closer. I couldn't be entirely sure. But during our conversations with Susan, during her second shift in California, I suspected the children also sensed something. But I refrained from asking them. Susan seemed a bit preoccupied. When we spoke with her, I assumed Wayne's decline was faster than expected. My wife was deeply affected. I reiterated to her several times, if it becomes too difficult for you, we can adjust things. No, it's okay, sometimes. I just need to remind myself how lucky we are to have each other. Wayne has no wife or children. It must be tough for him here. Besides me. And Diana and Mom when they're around. During Susan's absence, we managed well. The family ran quite smoothly. Personally, the adjustment was a bit challenging. Without my partner and best friend by my side. Also, the absence of Susan every day. Because of our physical connection. From 3 times a week to 0. During the month she was away. I wondered if she also felt this absence. I went alone to the airport to pick up Susan. The second time. If I'm being honest, I considered booking a hotel room, so we could be intimate and then drive home. My desire was insatiable. My excitement left no comfortable space in my jeans. As I drove to the airport. When I arrived at the airport, I had to spend a few minutes in my car, calming down my intense arousal. My wife had been gone for 2 months. In the past 10 weeks. I was extremely excited. I was worried I might embarrass myself at the airport. As she walked through the gate towards me, she was wearing jeans and a simple shirt. Yet to me, she looked as beautiful as if she was wearing a gown. Although I noticed she seemed tired as she approached. I was too excited to think deeply. Until she didn't reciprocate my kiss with the same passion. Did I realize something might be wrong? As I pulled back from her, I caught a glimpse of her downcast eyes. She looked exhausted. My initial thought was, my brother's health issues must be affecting her more than she's admitting. Another thought flashed through my mind, but it felt too selfish to dwell on. My previous excitement vanished. I was acutely aware of Susan's behavior. On the way home, conversation was sparse. I think we both sensed something was off. As usual, the children swarmed around their mother. When we got home, this eased some of the tension between Susan and me. They probably nattered on at her for an hour. After she came back, although she didn't say much, her tired smile assured the children everything was fine, at least from their perspective. Once the children finally went to bed, I approached Susan and asked if taking care of Wayne had become too much for her, physically or mentally. Since she arrived, she seemed to have some vitality for the first time. What are you thinking, Jeff? Do you doubt my ability to handle this? I'm just a bit tired. Sitting in the airport for hours, then enduring a long flight is always exhausting. I can handle it. My mom and Diana are here for Wayne. Okay, no problem. I understand you just look a bit worn out. That's what I mean, I replied, getting up from the chair and heading to the kitchen, ostensibly to get a drink, because I had to work the next day. I went to bed at 11, trying to persuade Susan to join me, for reasons I thought were obvious. Obviously not obvious enough, because she told me she would stay up for a while longer. I'm sure my jaw dropped when she said that. Here, I was actually longing for some intimacy. After a month alone, Susan acted as if she had no desire at all. Yes, I had a problem. After a good night's sleep, when I came home from work the next evening, my wife seemed to be in a noticeably better mood. She prepared a delicious dinner and exuded a more pleasant atmosphere. Although I couldn't shake the feeling, her smile lacked sincerity. That night, we shared an intimate moment in bed. But I couldn't shake the feeling she wasn't fully engaged, which made me wonder if she really cared. I wasn't the only one who noticed the change in Susan's behavior. On Friday, Marianne approached me, suggesting we take a walk after dinner. Hey, Dad, what's up with Mom? Something's off. You did something. I understood Marianne's insinuation, but I didn't respond. As far as I knew, my only mistake might have been being myself. It seems Uncle Wayne's health is deteriorating rapidly. I suspect your mom might be struggling with depression, not knowing how to communicate it to us. Well, at least that's my hope, I replied. My daughter wasn't easily fooled. My answer didn't fully satisfy her. Aren't you worried she might develop feelings for Uncle Wayne, given how close they've become because of his illness? I've noticed her talking to him on the phone. She acts like a schoolgirl. She doesn't realize he calls her when I'm home. It's quite unsettling. She's giggling. She also says things I think are inappropriate for a married woman. What should we do? To be honest, I'm not sure, I replied. If it's just a fleeting infatuation between them, I might tolerate some of it. But if it's more than that, I'm quite traditional when it comes to marriage vows, Mayor. If she breaks those, we might face some serious issues. Susan seemed relieved. The following Sunday, when she returned to California, I felt a mix of relief and frustration. We were only intimate 6 times in the 2 weeks she was back for a month. Our connection was lacking in and out of the bedroom. We were nothing more than friends with benefits. Maybe, if it's too hard for your mom or Diana to bear, we should consider hiring professional help for Wayne, I suggested, as she walked towards her gate. Remember, you have a family that needs you. Don't give up on us for him. How dare you, she snapped. I'm taking care of your brother. Your brother, you're just a selfish bastard. I might be selfish, but I'm not stupid, I retorted. Getting too involved with Wayne is not good for our marriage. The next night, I called my parents to discuss my concerns. But my mother's response was dismissive, even accusing me of being selfish for worrying. When I mentioned to them, I won't tolerate any interference from my brother in my marriage, even if he's in a desperate situation, I felt a wave of nausea. You can't be serious, Jeff. He's your brother, she's your wife. You care about both of them, my mother asserted. Do I, Mom? I retorted. Do I really care that deeply about them? I was disappointed by my mother's reaction. But my father's poor sense of fairness didn't surprise me. Throughout my childhood, he always favored my brother over me. It seems nothing has changed in adulthood. My love for Susan has been unwavering since childhood. Though I suspect she has crossed boundaries with my brother. My love for her compels me to give her the benefit of the doubt, though it's at the limit of my self-esteem. Some might interpret it as my ego. But whatever the label, I need to maintain my integrity and self-worth. My daughter actively assisted with my plan. She discreetly obtained Susan's key while she was at home and made a copy. I planned to drop in uninvited at my brother's house, prepared to stay for a few days if necessary, to find out the truth firsthand. I waited until my wife's 2-week stay in California before flying out myself. I rented a car and arrived at Wayne's house. I entered at 2 a.m., holding out a sliver of hope, but deep down knowing what awaited me. I found them both asleep in Wayne's bed. I entered the room with a pot of cold water. I poured it over their heads, eliciting their shocked screams as they threw off the covers, revealing their nakedness. Their expressions shifted from horror to menace once they saw me standing there, holding my phone. If you weren't dying, I'd kill you, I yelled at my brother. As for you, if you don't understand, we're done. You don't have to go home with me after a month. You can stay here with him until he dies, Susan cried, trying to cover herself with her hands. Though it was futile. Everyone in this room has already seen everything. Before sleeping with my despicable brother, which should have been dignified. I spat. I'm sorry, Jeff, she sobbed. But he's dying, I thought I was comforting him. He's family, so I thought it was okay, she sobbed. It was the right thing to do. Even your mom said so. My mom thought it was a good idea, I shouted. Well, yes. She and Diana discussed what to do for Wayne. That's what we decided. He can't do this much longer. So we started last month. So you, Diana and Mom both thought it was a good idea. You never thought of telling me. Your husband should be the closest person to you in the world, to whom you pledged loyalty years ago. If it was such a good idea, why wasn't I included? Were you planning to tell me? Wayne apparently decided it was time to share his thoughts with me. Relax, Jeffy. Your wife is an amazing woman, and great in bed too. My brother interjected. No one said anything to you because you're an asshole. We all know you can't handle this. We were right. So you are all part of this wonderful plan, how great. The deceivers have a say. But not the loyal husband kept in the dark. I commented, well, you're right. I don't agree with this sharing of my wife. You can have her. I'll find someone else. Someone who's loyal to me. No, Jeff, it's not permanent. Wayne is dying, Jeff, show some compassion, Susan pleaded. Are you serious, ma'am? My compassion is letting you take care of him for a month at a time. Not sleeping with him like a harlot. I retorted, don't call me that. I'm not a harlot, she objected. You had sex with a man who's not your husband. That's what I call being a harlot. Even if you don't agree, I retorted. Who cares what he thinks? Wayne interjected. I think you're a great sister-in-law. As Susan and Wayne put on robes. And she began to change the wet sheets. I asked my wife. So how long has this been going on? I could tell she was trying to soften the blow. Somehow, lying wasn't her strong suit. Or at least it wasn't in the past. We started sleeping together last month, when I was here. He doesn't have much time left, Jeff. She cried, pleading. Please let it go, don't pretend to be innocent. We all know you've been unfaithful to him, he's a cheater. End of story, I grumbled. For most of the argument, my brother hovered on the periphery. With a smile that seemed to suggest. He held the key to the ultimate question of light. As Susan took the sheets to the washing machine, he took the opportunity to mock. Trust me not to take revenge on a dying man. You know, bro, she's great in bed. And it didn't take much to convince her to move into my room. My brother Brad. You want to know why, bro? Because I can. I beat Jeffy. I won. You've been unbearable all your life, Wayne. I guess it's no surprise. You'd be even more unbearable on your deathbed. I hope you rot in hell, literally. Enjoy the rest of your life, if you can, you despicable man. I turned and left the house. Headed back to the airport and boarded the plane home. Before 8 a.m. I dozed on the couch in the family room. As my children entered the room, I stood and hugged each of them. You're back so soon. I guess things didn't go as we hoped. Marianne commented. Tam, I wish I could finish high school with both parents still married. Will added. I'm sorry, Will. I should have talked to you too. I hope you didn't notice what happened. Nor do I have to explain. I said. Damn, I've loved that woman for almost all my life. So that's it, Dad. You're not going to forgive her? My son asked. It's complicated, Will. Marriage loyalty. It's complicated. But when one partner betrays the other, saying sorry doesn't erase the hurt and betrayal. It's like killing someone and then saying sorry. The damage is done. So how meaningful is an apology? She shattered my heart. She broke my trust. She disrespected me. Sorry just isn't enough, I clarified. The pain in his eyes conveyed his understanding of my words. Children today seem to mature quickly. Considering the current divorce rate is over 50%. He likely has several acquaintances whose parents have separated. How about pizza tonight? I don't feel like cooking. We can talk while we eat, I suggested. They all nodded in agreement. Over a large pepperoni and sausage pizza. I revealed everything to the children. Needless to say, there were tears. I'm not ashamed to say many of them were mine. I also let the children know about their grandmother and aunt's deception. They were as surprised and angry as I was. I find it interesting that neither my mother or sister reached out to apologize or clarify things. I'm sure Susan must have talked to both of them by now. I expected a swift and forceful response from the sisterhood soon. The next day didn't disappoint. I arranged a meeting with a lawyer, someone I had contacted before going to California. I already sensed what awaited me at my brother's house. This trip was just to confirm. Although a part of me hoped to be proven wrong, I knew it was unlikely. It's like trying to move quickly in front of a mirror, expecting it not to capture every detail, even though it actually does. Maybe it sounds ridiculous, but we've all tried it at some point, haven't we? That night, the first call for sisterly reconciliation came from my mother, although it felt more like an attack than an apology. "He's dying, Jeff." She just wanted to bring him some comfort in his last days. "Let's not forget he's family, not a stranger," Mom insisted as soon as I answered the phone. "He's my wife." "Damn it, Mom," I said sharply on the phone. She had no right. You could have intervened. But instead you and Diane Egerton encouraged her to give Wayne what should have been exclusively mine, not even consulting me on his impending death. His impending death did not give him the right to her love. Not once. I heard my mother gasp as I dropped the first F-bomb on her, a tone I had never used with her before. Too bad. I knew there would be more cursing in the future. "How dare you use that language?" were the only words she said before I hung up. She had no right to lecture me, I decided. The phone rang immediately after I hung up. "How dare you?" I hung up again, and another call came right after. This time greeted by silence. "Perhaps old habits can change, Jeff," she asked cautiously. "You won't hang up on me again, will you?" "New rule, Mom." I replied, "If you try to lecture me, I will hang up." "You encouraged my wife to have an affair with my brother. All because he's dying. You're my mother, for God's sake. You shouldn't encourage my wife to have an affair with my dying brother. What kind of mother does that to her son?" She coughed on the other end of the line. "But he's dying," she interjected suddenly. Her energy seemed to be renewed by her statement. "To hell with that. To hell with that, to hell with that," I responded loudly. Dying is not an excuse for him to break my marriage. It's not an excuse for her to sleep with him. Nor is it an excuse for you and Diana to push her to break my marriage. It won't break your marriage unless you let it. He will be gone soon, you and Susan can move on. He won't even be a consideration," she said. "Or he will forever haunt my mind." "Maybe in her mind too," I retorted. "Don't you have any forgiveness in your heart?" Mom asked. "No, I don't," I replied. "If Dad and Belinda Parker, the blonde woman who lived across the street when you were a child, would you have so easily forgiven Dad for sleeping with her?" Belinda Parker. As I spoke, I could hear the saliva flexes almost being pushed from Mom's mouth. "If she was dying, would you allow Dad to sleep with Belinda Parker?" I asked. "That's a ridiculous comparison," she said sharply to me. "Obviously not," I replied calmly. My sister called 2 days later, sounding very sorry. It was a relief. "I regret not realizing the obvious sooner," Diana admitted. "We were all taken by Wayne's illness and lost our better judgment, even ignoring our family bonds. I shouldn't have encouraged Susan to have an affair with you just because Wayne is dying." Ronnie was very angry when I confessed what Susan did. My mom's in support. He hasn't spoken to me properly since, even saying it would be justified if I punched me. Seems I need to work hard to regain his trust. She sighed an hour later. Ronnie called to apologize for my sister's actions. "I really didn't know, Jeff. I'm really sorry. If I had known, I wouldn't have tolerated this foolishness." "What would you do?" he asked. "I've made up my mind, Ron. Although Wayne may have tempted her, Susan had agency. using his illness as an excuse is just that, an excuse. She chose forgiveness over permission, especially with Mom and Diana's push. It's not a one-time mistake. She's been involved with him for the past 2 months. I'll support you, Jeff. Whatever you decide, I'm here for you, Ronnie promised. I waited until Susan's plane took off before calling her parents to tell them what their daughter had been doing in California with my brother. As expected, given my long-standing familiarity with them, they were both embarrassed and shocked after understanding the truth of the matter. "Come on, Jeff, is this some kind of sick joke?" her father shouted at me over the phone. "No, it's not a joke, Dad. You know I wouldn't joke about something like this." He's always had feelings for Susan, and it seems he decided to act on them, thinking he had nothing to lose. I'm not sure if my mother and sister knew about his intentions beforehand, but I know they encouraged her. I explained. "She's too smart to fall into such a foolish trap," my father-in-law said. "I'm sorry, we've apparently raised a wanton daughter." "Jeff, I'm shocked. I assume you'll divorce her." "Yes, I won't tolerate this. I could never trust her again," I said with certainty. "The divorce papers will be served as soon as she lands." I waited until Susan's plane took off, so my in-laws wouldn't have a chance to warn her beforehand. Even though she would be reprimanded by them, it wouldn't really serve as a warning. I wanted her to be completely caught off guard, hoping it would cause her as much pain as her betrayal did to me. If anyone should understand that I can be vengeful, it's Susan. She should have known I intended to retaliate. Several times. When she was caught by me, I wasn't surprised she didn't call for 2 weeks. She knew an empty, insincere apology would only make me more furious. She experiencedly knew the best way to soothe my anger was to be intimate with me in bed, completely immersed in her warmth. It was a strategy she had successfully used before, but this time was different. As usual, I was waiting for her when she showed up, but this time there were no hugs or kisses. Her shocked expression told me she wasn't expecting this, but she was really surprised when she was approached by a young man, handing her a legal envelope, serving her the papers. "After 19 years, you couldn't even let me be served in the privacy of my home?" she whispered. "After what you did, you didn't even have the decency to tell me about your affair, forcing me to find out on my own. You're lucky. When I found the two of you together, I didn't take extreme measures. But neither of you is worth going to jail for. He will end soon. As for you, you'll just be a painful memory. I hope I can finally bury it in my mind, like a regrettable mistake." Tears quietly streamed down her cheeks. She tried to restrain herself from crying in public. Instinctively, I took out a tissue from my shirt pocket and handed it to her. The journey home was mostly quiet, which suited me fine. Perhaps curiosity finally got the better of her, because before we arrived at the house, she asked who realized her so-called lapse in judgment. I couldn't help but laugh at her phrasing, causing her a pained expression. "The children and your parents now know. They're not very happy. My family all know, except for Ronnie. He's very angry with me because of my sister. When I informed him about his wife's involvement, their marriage is in jeopardy. Because my brother-in-law is very angry at my sister for supporting my wife's ruthless betrayal of me. Your one glimmer of hope is, my parents still think your actions are extremely compassionate. They naturally would think that. They never overtly favor their other son. I think. Unfortunately, I'm not the one facing death." "Don't talk like that, Jeff," Susan interjected. "They both care about you." "I know," I replied. "Almost as much as they admire Wayne." When we arrived home, The children showed only mild enthusiasm for Susan's return. She was hurt by their obvious lack of excitement for her return. If I hadn't persuaded the children to at least show respect to Susan, she would have been devastated. Later that evening, Susan's parents called, not in a friendly manner. She put it on speakerphone, so we all heard her mother refer to her in derogatory terms. Afterward, she removed the phone from speaker mode and left the room. Grandma is very angry. I've never heard her use language like that, Mariana commented immediately after Susan left the room. I wouldn't be surprised if she grounded Mom for a few weeks. At least Susan's flushed face from the call said it all. She re-entered the room without saying a word. The children quietly left, as if following an unspoken cue. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then Susan broke it. Do you really think rushing into a divorce, Jeff, is the right thing to do? We haven't even discussed it since you found out. Your brother and you have been having an affair for a while. I gave you a lot of space. I'll bet you didn't even stop when you were with me. Those 2 weeks after I found out, I retorted sharply. Her expression twisted with displeasure, confirming my suspicions. He's dying, Jeff. He doesn't have much time left. It's the least I can do, she protested weakly. Do you plan to sleep with other terminally ill people too? That would certainly bring joy to many, I said sarcastically. He's family, Jeff. What do you expect, she retorted. I see you as someone who used the situation as an excuse to be with my brother. I shot back. She pouted, her eyes flashing with anger. I didn't flinch, meeting her gaze head-on. We gave each other our first times, Jeff. Remember, you're the only man who's been with me. Have you ever thought about being with another woman? She finally admitted some honesty. But it won't change anything. I've certainly thought about it. But I never acted on it. Because I was committed to our marriage. Because I love you. I made a promise to you, and I intend to keep it. I would be content spending my life only with you. I asserted. I could feel her unease. I could observe her mentally struggling to find a response. He's going to be gone soon. Only our families know what happened. There's no need for others to know, Susan complained. So now we're bargaining, I interjected. You want to keep sleeping with my brother until he's exhausted, and then reunite with me, pretending nothing happened, and live happily ever after. Well, I can't stop now, Jeff. He doesn't have much time left. It would be cruel to stop, she justified. That's probably the worst thing you've said, Susan. Even if you promise never to be with Jeff again, our chances of reconciliation are slim. But now you're trying to negotiate more time with him. You're either very naive or shamelessly wanton. I don't care that he's dying. Our marriage is dying. That should be more important to you. Apparently, it's not. Because after spending 2 weeks at home, she returned to California as if nothing happened. I didn't ask, and she didn't say. But I assumed she was still involved with my brother, even though I knew his health was rapidly deteriorating. Although Susan continued to communicate regularly with the children, Susan and I only spoke once a week. During these calls, she would gently remind me of his declining health and her impending return to me. I never acknowledged these words. When she called home about a week ago, I sensed something different in her cautious tone. I wondered if Wayne was about to pass away. When she calmly shattered any hope of reconciliation. I'm pregnant, Jeff, she almost whispered. I barely heard her words, but they were still recorded. My response was delayed as I processed the implication. This is difficult news, Susan, I finally managed to say. The judge will postpone the divorce until the baby is born. No, he won't, I retorted. The child is not mine, so it won't affect the proceedings. I could claim it's yours, she suggested. Lying in court is perjury. I warn you could face serious consequences. Besides, DNA testing can distinguish close relatives after just a few months of pregnancy. Your one benefit is your child might inherit most of his estate. I continued, I will not be responsible for the baby. Only Marianne and Will. We will divide our assets equally. You will receive alimony. But unless my brother had more savings than I realized, you will likely need a job within a few years. Unless my parents decide to help you out. Considering you're giving them another grandchild. Wayne's only one. The children chose to live with me. So the judge awarded me the house. Until my youngest child graduates from college. Susan's lawyer was furious. But the judge seemed to balance things out. Knowing about Susan's infidelity. Although we don't live in a fault state. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Wayne passed away shortly after. Adding to the turmoil for Susan and my parents. I deliberately avoided the funeral. As I had warned, I could be vindictive. About 2 months later, Susan gave birth to a healthy boy. As my children excitedly informed me, they warmly welcomed their new half-brother. Though they understood my limitations, I would not harm the child. I would not take on the role of his late father. I would not teach him sports or similar skills. I knew my boundaries, even in my claimed decency. When my children informed me that their mother moved in with my parents shortly after giving birth to her child, she eventually found a part-time job to help share the costs. During her working hours, my mom looked after the child. Because my parents staunchly supported Susan in this situation and repeatedly suggested I accept her actions and move on. I felt compelled to take the only action I thought appropriate. To cut both of them out of my life. I blocked their numbers and stopped attending any family gatherings. Except for my children. I only maintained contact with Ronnie and Diana, on the condition that they never reveal to my parents or ex-wife my whereabouts or activities. Though it was a difficult request from my sister, Ronnie made it clear he would end their marriage if she did not comply. Realizing the fragile state of her marriage, Diana wisely kept silent. My children fully understood my decision and never protested my absence from family gatherings. We celebrated Christmas, birthdays, and other important occasions a day or two after the rest of the family met. The only exception was my children's weddings. I promised them I would not let my ex-wife or former family members prevent me from attending their special day. However, I let them inform the other family members. I would not tolerate any mistreatment. I promised my children I would not be the one to disrupt their weddings. My daughter was the first to get married. 6 years after the divorce, I proudly walked her down the aisle. Then sat next to my ex-wife in the front row at the bride's table. At one point during the ceremony, Susan tried to hold my hand. But I quickly pulled away, conveying my position. Marianne arranged for me and the family friends to sit together, not at a family table. By now, everyone knew Susan and I divorced because of her infidelity. So there was no need to rehash the situation. We all seemed to enjoy ourselves at the table. I made sure to socialize and fulfill my duties as the host of the event, considering I was footing the bill. Throughout the evening, I visited each table for a few minutes. Even walked up to the family table to thank them for their attendance. My ex-wife and parents looked at me strangely as I thanked them and moved on. I danced with every woman at the table and several others throughout the night, noticing Susan occasionally glance at me, despite having no intention to invite her. "Aren't you going to dance with Mom at least once, Dad?" Marianne asked me after a while. "After all, you two are the reason I'm here tonight." No, sweetheart, I won't. I'm sorry, but I have no interest. Let's not spoil the evening, I replied. I could see Marianne contemplating, perhaps wanting to press the issue further, but ultimately decided against it. She walked over to her mom, talking and holding hands. Susan looked at me with tears in her eyes. 2 years later, I did not foot the bill for my son's wedding. Instead, he addressed his family situation with his future in-laws. I found myself once again seated at a table among friends. He confided in me about how he owed his fiancée's parents an explanation. Initially scared away by this story, they ultimately showed great understanding towards me. However, Susan felt betrayed. Our son involved her and threatened to boycott the event. I felt incredibly proud when Will told her he would miss her at the wedding, but would not apologize for telling the truth. It's not on me, Mom. I overheard him saying on the phone. You made your decision. I'm just the messenger here. I had to face Amy's parents and explain. My mom had an affair with my dad's brother. It was very humiliating. 12 years after the divorce, I sat in my favorite bar on a Friday night, enjoying a glass of Glenmorangie single malt whiskey with a splash of water. The week had been challenging and rewarding, so I indulged in some top-shelf whiskey. Since my divorce, I've dated occasionally, but never found anyone to replace Susan. In my heart, I never denied I was deeply in love with her. Her betrayal hurt me deeply. Perhaps I still have feelings for her, if I'm honest with myself. Nevertheless, I feel proud